Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of Teaching the Conspiracies. I am quite excited to be jumping in this week to the lesson that I've been teaching the last 4 years, I guess, to my middle school students, using the moon landings as really the case study for how we can jump into the SIFT web literacy framework. So I'm going to try and share my screen with you, and hopefully this is going to share. Look at that. It didn't even work. There we go. All right. I'm using this a little bit of a different way to share screens here. So what I'd like to do is go through briefly the required and optional media and the activities for this week. I want to point out to you that and this will take you a little bit more time than what I would normally think of as 60 to 90 minutes. But if you want to see an entire lesson of me teaching this to my students, the last link under optional media is a 46-minute recording. It's actually back in January of 2022. But that is me teaching this to my students using the slideshow that I'm going to ask you to review and take a look at that can really give you a more of a deep dive into the way in which I teach this lesson, and have found this to be a real successful way to have students engage with this content. In terms of the required content, I'm going to step through the slides that I use to teach this lesson. I'm going to just mention, but ask you to watch this 4-minute video from 60 Minutes, which is a puppeteer kind of introducing the idea of a marionette and pulling strings, which is a powerful metaphor to use here. And then the primary video for this week is this 13-minute video by J.P. Sears called Why the Moon Landing Was Fake. One of the most important skills that we're going to talk about and model in this course is lateral reading. And so one of the lessons that I teach my students prior to this lesson, and it's in the links that many of you may have done before week 1 started, is the Wikipedia Launchpad lesson. And so learning about how Wikipedia articles work, how we can go down to the bottom and use references, and we can really vet someone. Many times, not everyone has a Wikipedia article about them, but sometimes people do, and so we can use that in order to get more information about somebody, and especially in this case, determining if that person is someone we should consider credible for a topic like whether the moon landings occurred and if they are true or not. So these are the slides that I'm going to invite you to take a look at, and as I mentioned, and I have probably several times in this class, helping students ask the question, how are you going to decide who to believe, is really important. And this, I make kind of a joke about this, that saying something on YouTube doesn't make it true. But one of the things we need to be aware of is the more times we hear something shared, the more likely we are to believe that. And it's very important for us to remind ourselves about how challenging the information landscape is, and that there are many things that are being shared today online, not only on YouTube, but in other places, that are not true, that we really need to check out. And so the SIFT Web Literacy Framework, is the core centerpiece of this entire lesson. Mike Caulfield developed this, and you can click this link here at the top to go to his blog, and there's a really good post called The 4 Moves. In fact, I think I'll go ahead and put that on the required media as well. We do the first 3 steps primarily, stopping, especially when we have something that really challenges our thinking, gets us emotionally responding, is a source we haven't heard of before. It's so critical to do that, and then investigate that source, find better coverage if we're not satisfied that that source is good, and then trace to the original in some cases, like with a photograph or a video or something like that. And so that's exactly what we're doing with this lesson. So most of my students have not actually heard, it depends, of a marionette doll, but when you show them this picture, I like to use this 60 Minutes episode from a couple of years ago that is a very talented marionette puppeteer to try to drive this idea home, that people will try to pull our strings, and this is what we want to be aware of and savvy to. This graphic comes from an excellent article that I've referenced previously by John Cook and some other authors, which was about the false documentary Plandemic that was released during the pandemic. And I challenge my students to look for, as we're watching this video by JP Sears, any of these characteristics of what I would consider to be a Fruit Loop conspiracy theory. Now, I explained to my students that I don't think you'll find this in any dictionaries or maybe anywhere else on the internet. What is a Fruit Loop conspiracy theory? When I was growing up in Manhattan, Kansas, I remember friends and others talking about that idea is really a Fruit Loop idea. It's a crazy idea. And one of the important things that we want students to understand is that not every conspiracy theory is completely false. There are elements of truth often shared in conspiracy theories, even outlandish ones, but there are some that turn out to be true. The essence of them are true, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think I mentioned Operation Paperclip already as an example. So reinterpreting randomness, it's the R in this acrostic for conspire, is definitely in this video by JP Sears. Contradictory is as well. And so that's something to really look for. And then we'll come back and we talk about this afterwards. In terms of overriding suspicion, that's something that Odd Ones Out, James Rallison, talked about in that video, Conspiracies and Crazy People, that again I used to really introduce our unit. And then here's the video. I've had my students reflect on this in different ways. At one point, I was having them write blog posts on a blog that we had, on a class blog on Write About. It is 13 minutes long, so we will do this in 2 different days. We'll break it up, and I really do like the sketchnoting. What your optional media create is for this week is actually to do either an info pick or lateral reading. Lateral reading, an info pick or a sketch note. Lateral reading is so important. I have a football and Nerf football in my room. We'll practice some laterals. We'll talk about that means going to someone else. You don't just hold on to the ball yourself. You lateral, you give it to someone else. And that is what we have to do when we are laterally reading. And so again, we'll use the Wikipedia page for JP Sears to do that. So those are the slides that I use with my students. If you'll go to the flip grid reflection this week, I'm going to ask you to consider why JP Sears' video about the moon landing could be appealing or engaging to watch. If you compare this, second question, to a text-based news article, what makes his video challenging to analyze and respond to critically? And third, what factual elements did you see or hear him talk about that were placed alongside unsubstantiated assertions or claims about the moon landing? So if you want to share any of those on Flipgrid, and then again, you can also respond with text below if you'd prefer to do that. The weekly create is again optional, but the challenge this time is to create either an info pick or a sketch note. And I've included a link in a couple places here to a showcase that I've created for my students of some excellent media examples. And so not all of these are from this unit, but many of them are. You'll see some sketch notes. You're going to see some info pics referencing the idea of marionettes and not letting people manipulate you, lateral reading. My students have done a great job with this in the past, I think, and I like to be able to showcase that. So that may help you as you consider what you might like to do for your daily create. And then again, if you're willing to share that on our class Padlet, that's great. You can also join the private Facebook group that I maintain and share into that, which would be wonderful. In terms of optional media, there's not quite as much for week 4, but there really are some excellent articles and resources. This is a July 2019 article from The Conversation talking about how the moon landing theories, conspiracies began, why they persist. One of the videos it references is the Capricorn 1 movie trailer from 1978, which you may know was a movie depicting a fake Mars landing. And so anyway, that's the second optional video that I include. There's a Neil deGrasse Tyson video talking about the absurdity of flat Earth. But I think it's really important to not just discount this and think that nobody would ever, consider a theory like flat Earth to have validity. The entertainment side of this and that engagement side is an element here. But this can also just get to the heart of science denial, which we've certainly seen with vaccines and anti-vaxxers. And I don't get deeply into that with my students, but this is an excellent article talking about how important it is for us as teachers to cultivate a scientific attitude and an understanding of the scientific method and the approach, and misconceptions about science. And it's just excellent. And I think that really answers part of that question about why it's so important that we address this. This is a book that I have listened to on Audible. Again, totally recommend. It is called Off the Edge: Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Everything by Kelly Wheel. And this, kind of like the other book that I mentioned about white supremacy, Kelly as an author really goes sort of undercover to some conferences and into the online community of flat earthers and conspiracy theorists and advocates, and I found that to be a very worthwhile video. So the last one here is the lesson recording that I have already mentioned. So that kind of summarizes where we are with our media and our activities for this week. I hope that you find this to be both worthwhile and engaging. And I really hope that this is something that you find. We're in different contexts. Some of us are teaching adult learners, whereas others are teaching students. But I have certainly found this to be a less controversial context, thinking of the moon landing, as a context for discussing SIFT and practicing SIFT, and really fun. My kids have really enjoyed doing this and talking about conspiracies and delving into this, and then learning how to fact check and laterally read and use Wikipedia in that way as a lateral reading source. It's been successful. So I look forward to seeing what you think and create, hearing your reflections, and responding to you here in week 4. Have fun and good luck.